I flipped furniture for profit, and this chest of drawers made me $450 within 24 hours of listing. If we haven't met yet, I'm Jade. I'm a solo mom, and I'm flipping furniture so that I can save up my house deposit. Overall, this piece was in great condition. It did have a couple of aesthetic nicks and scratches, and some drawer runners needed to be replaced, but these are all things that you can fix. And I just thought that this piece had great bones. It had a good shape, there was plenty of practical storage in it, and the handles were already fantastic. In my opinion though, it just looked a little bit dark and dreary as is, so follow along if you want to see exactly what I do to get that $450 profit. For this piece, I'm going to do a natural timber top and a painted base, so I needed to start removing some of that existing finish from the top. I'm using my tungsten carbide blade here, or carbide scraper, and this is essentially a very sharp blade that I'm scraping across the surface of the piece to remove the finish. It will remove paint, it will remove varnish. 9 times out of 10, you can remove a finish with a carbide blade, and it's an alternative to using a chemical-based stripper or just jumping straight in with your sander. You can get these online, or most hardware stores have them, and I've got a link through my bio to grab the one that I've got. My next step was to remove the handles so that I could give the piece a thorough clean down. Dirt and debris loves to hang out behind these handles, so it's always a good idea to remove them before you start cleaning so that you don't have to come back and clean your piece again. On a majority of pieces, I will use Crud Cutter to clean down because it's a concentrated degreaser, so it gets rid of dirt, grease and grime. However, you can use vinegar and water. I also like to use that, and you could use hot soapy water as an alternative as well. You just want to make sure that whatever you do use, if it's a degreaser, you need to come around with some plain hot water after you've cleaned everything down to make sure you've got no residue left from those degreasing products. Once everything was completely dry after my water rinse, I went on to sanding down the top, and I used 120 grit sandpaper followed by 240 grit to remove what was left of the existing finish. The only thing that I wasn't able to get out with sanding was this little black spot, which I did try to swell up by using a wet towel and a heat gun, but that didn't work. It didn't pop out, so I used some paint stripper to remove the existing finish that was there. So I just put a localized dollop of my paint stripper there, and then went on to scuff sanding the rest of the piece. I'm using 240 grit sandpaper to scuff up everywhere that I was going to be painting. So the drawer fronts, the body of the piece. And for those that are unfamiliar, scuff sanding is essentially creating a key or some micro texture so that your primer will adhere to the surface effectively. What you're aiming for here is for the surface to look dull and milky. You don't want to see any slick, glossy shine on the surface. Paint doesn't like sticking to glossy surfaces. So even when cleaned down, you want the surface to look matte. I used a firm brush to scrub the spot where that existing finish was, and then I came back with some methylated spirits to clean everything up. It's essential after you have done a scuff sand that you come around and you remove all of the dust. Paint also does not like dust, so I'm going around with some vinegar and water. You can go around with just water and a tack cloth, but vinegar and water is what I had on hand. And you want to make sure that anywhere that you are going to tape is thoroughly clean as well, because if there is dust left on the surface, your tape will fail and you'll get overspray onto places that you don't want. So you'll get clean lines if the surface is clean. You'll notice here that I'm only taping the edge and just on the top of the edge, and that's because I'm going to flip this piece over and paint upside down. So I'm not worried about overspray getting onto the top of my piece because it will essentially be covered up. I'm using my Wagner spray gun here, and I used Zinza water-based primer. I'm spraying the underneath of the piece. I sprayed the back as well and the body, and then moved on to the drawer fronts. You'll notice here that I haven't actually taped off or put paper around my drawers, and that's because I prefer to save time and use a barrier method instead. So you can see there that I have an offcut of timber, and I'm using it to block the overspray from getting into the drawer or onto the drawer sides. To ensure I'm getting the smoothest finish possible, I like to go around with a high grit sandpaper across the entire piece between my primer and my paint coats. So you can see here that I'm just lightly sanding with a sanding block, and then I come back and remove all of the dust. This just makes sure that anything that may have flown into the paintwork while it was drying, sand, dust if it's a windy day, or any texture from your spray gun, your brush or your roller is eliminated before you start putting your next coat of paint on. To paint this piece, I'm using water-based enamel because it's an incredibly hard-wearing paint. This one is by Dulux. It is their Aqua Enamel range, and it's in the color Dollar. Not Not only is it a hard wearing paint, it also does not require a top coat. So you don't have to come back over the top with a polyurethane to seal this and protect it even more. This paint is designed to go onto door trims, architraves, window trims, places that are going to be kicked and scuffed around. So it is sufficient to put onto your furniture, and you can buy it in bulk. So it really cuts down the cost of painting pieces of furniture when you're flipping for profit. Once my paintwork was dry, I flipped the piece over and did a wet test. And for those that are unfamiliar, a wet test is simply wetting down the surface of the timber to mimic what it is going to do once it is sealed. The timber on the top of this piece was rubber wood, and it was finger jointed. So there was already a bit of variation between each of the little pieces of timber that had been joined together for the top. But rubber wood is almost like an oak in that it soaks in stain. So you can see where the previous stain is actually soaked deeper down into the pores of the timber, creating those dark shadows. So to soften the contrast between those dark shadows and the rest of the timber, and to just create more of a neutral base, I'm applying a paint wash. If you're unfamiliar, paint washing is essentially applying a watered down mix of paint to the surface of the timber to change the overall tone. But it's not just about changing the tone of timber. You can also mask little blemishes like this, soften contrast. You can do some amazing things with paint washing, and it's all determined by what paint colors you actually put into your paint wash mix. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about paint washing, then I've created some fantastic resources through the link in my bio, which will teach you everything that you need to know. I've run through color theory, exactly what paints to put into your washes to achieve different results, how to actually mix up, how to apply, and then how to seal for longevity in the end. For this piece, I'm applying my paint wash by hand. You can see I have a microfiber cloth here. I've applied with the grain. I wait around 10 seconds before coming back with an old dry t-shirt to wipe off any excess. I then speed up my dry time with my hair dryer before coming back over with a high grade of sandpaper, usually 400 to 600 grit sandpaper, just to eliminate any raised grain that may have popped up when we put that paint wash on. I applied 3 coats of this paint wash to the top of the piece to really soften out that shadow, and this left me with a very light, cool toned top, ready for me to seal with a tinted hard wax oil. To add a little bit of depth back into the top of this piece and a hint of warmth without it being too warm, I chose a shade by Fitties. It's in their tinted hard wax oil range. This one is Whiskey, and I actually mixed it into their matte clear hard wax oil. Fitties tinted hard wax oils are intermixable, so you can create some really beautiful tones with their range. But this is a fantastic product to use on dining tables, on kitchen bench tops, for anything that is going to possibly be going into a nursery like I had thought for this piece, because it is toy safe, it's food safe, it's water resistant, and it's stain resistant. I did a total of 2 coats of my custom mix, sanding in between with a brown paper bag. It was then time to head off to my local Bunnings store to replace the drawer runners, and they have a whole range of sizes. Just make sure that you measure before you go so you know exactly what you are getting, and I got enough to do all 4 of the bottom drawers. This is one of those tasks that can seem a little bit daunting, but it's actually pretty easy. All you do is take the old runner off, use the same holes, and put the new one on. My final step on this flip was to reinstall the old hardware, which I just cleaned up in some hot soapy water. Now guys, here is a quick reminder of where we were with this set, and this is where we are now. I don't think this looks dark and dreary anymore. It's such a classic color combination. A slightly warmer top and this olivey green tone really just works, and I love the fact that those original handles are just popping now. But as always, I would love to know what you guys think, so jump in the comments and let me know, is this one a nail or a fail?